"Your restoration permit has been denied on federal orders," declared Richard Blackwood, placing an official-looking document on Emma Thornton's kitchen table. "We'll be commencing an emergency historical assessment next week." The single mother of two stared at the government papers threatening to halt her painstaking renovation of the abandoned Westfield farmhouse she'd purchased at a rural auction just 4 months earlier. Warm autumn breeze drifted through the open windows, rustling the edges of the formal notice as Emma's fingers trembled slightly. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The Massachusetts farmhouse that had represented a fresh start now faced an uncertain future. "I don't understand," Emma said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've filed all the required permits. The county approved everything months ago." Blackwood adjusted his tie, the Department of Historical Preservation insignia catching the afternoon light. "New information has come to our attention, suggesting this property may have significant historical value previously undocumented. All renovation work must cease immediately pending full investigation." Emma's 12-year-old daughter, Abigail, appeared in the doorway, her curious eyes taking in the tension. Behind her, 9-year-old Noah clutched his sister's hand, sensing his mother's distress. "Mom, is everything okay?" Abigail asked. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Mr. Blackwood was just leaving," Emma replied, forcing a reassuring smile. "Why don't you two finish your homework while I make dinner?" As the children reluctantly retreated upstairs, Blackwood gathered his briefcase. "Mrs. Thornton, I understand this is difficult, but I strongly advise compliance. My department has considerable authority in these matters." After seeing him to the door, Emma leaned against the weathered frame of the 19th-century farmhouse, watching Blackwood's government vehicle disappear down the rural road. Only then did she allow herself a moment of panic. The renovation had consumed nearly all her savings. A delay of even a few weeks could be financially devastating. Inside, she spread the documents across the antique table she'd refinished herself. The legal language was opaque, but the underlying message was clear. Someone with significant influence had taken an interest in the property she'd purchased for what she thought was an incredible bargain. Emma Thornton had not expected to become a homeowner in rural Massachusetts. A museum conservator specializing in early American artifacts, she'd been making a comfortable living in Boston until the museum's unexpected downsizing left her without a position. With 2 children to support and housing costs in the city becoming untenable, she had begun searching for alternatives. The listing for the abandoned Westfield farmhouse had appeared like a miracle. A pre-Civil War property with 5 acres of land, sold at county auction for back taxes. At $187,000, it was a fraction of what even a small apartment would cost in the city. The catch, of course, was the condition. Abandoned for nearly 12 years, the farmhouse required extensive renovation, but Emma's professional background had given her the confidence to tackle the project. "We can do this," she had told her skeptical children during their first visit. "It'll be an adventure." Now, 4 months later, that adventure was threatened by bureaucracy she didn't understand. Emma pulled out her phone and called the one person who might help make sense of this situation, Martin Hayes, the local building inspector who had approved her initial permits. "Federal Historical Preservation Order," Martin said, his surprise evident even over the phone. "That's highly unusual, especially for a property with no documented historical significance. The Westfield place was just old Farmer Johnston's house before he passed. Been empty ever since his nephew inherited it and abandoned it." "Could there be something I'm missing?" Emma asked. "Some historical connection I don't know about?" "Not that I've ever heard. And my family goes back 6 generations in this county. But this Blackwood fellow, he's not local. If he's from the federal department, Someone important has taken an interest. After hanging up, Emma climbed the stairs to check on her children. Noah was already asleep, exhausted from a day of helping clean up the old barn. Abigail sat by her window, sketchbook open, drawing the sunset over the rolling hills behind there. "In property, is the government going to take our house away?" Abigail asked, without looking up from her drawing. Emma sat beside her daughter, struck by how perceptive children could be. "No, sweetheart, it's just some confusion about paperwork. We're not going anywhere." But later that night, as her children slept, Emma researched Richard Blackwood and found troubling information. He wasn't attached to any federal historical preservation department she could identify. His business card listed a private historical consulting firm with connections to Meridian Development Corporation, a company known for converting historic properties into luxury resorts. Over the next 3 days, Emma threw herself into documenting every aspect of her renovation work, photographing the condition of the house and organizing her permits. If someone was trying to challenge her ownership, she would be prepared to fight. On the 4th day after Blackwood's visit, Emma was removing damaged floorboards in what would eventually become her conservation workshop when she noticed something unusual. Unlike the other wide plank pine floors throughout the house, this section had been replaced with newer boards, perhaps 50 years ago. More curious still, they had been installed differently, not nailed down like the others, but carefully fitted in place. Using a pry bar, she gently lifted one board, then another. Beneath the floor was not the expected wooden joists and foundation, but a small hollow space containing a metal box. Heart racing, Emma carefully extracted the tarnished container. It was locked, but the ancient mechanism gave way with minimal effort. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, and a collection of letters tied with faded ribbon. The handwriting was elegant but faded, the flowing script of another era. Emma's trained eye immediately recognized its age, early 19th century, possibly older. The journal's first page bore a name and date: Eleanor Westfield, 1781. Tati, a conservator, Emma knew immediately she should handle these documents with archival gloves, but curiosity overwhelmed her professional caution. The first entry began: "Today we welcome Mr. Adams to our home, the second such visit this year. Though the journey from Philadelphia has exhausted him, his determination to secure our assistance remains strong." Emma turned to the next page, her conservation training allowing her to handle the delicate paper with care. As she continued reading, her professional excitement grew. If authentic, these documents referenced meetings with founding fathers and suggested the Westfield farmhouse had served as something far more significant than a simple rural dwelling. By midnight, Emma had read enough to understand why someone might want control of this property. The Westfield farmhouse, according to these journals, had been a previously undocumented way station in a network of safe houses used by the architects of the early republic, a place where founding fathers had met in secret during a critical period after the Revolution but before the Constitutional Convention. If these documents were authentic, they would reshape understanding of how key constitutional principles had been developed. And Emma Thornton, unemployed museum conservator and single mother, was the only person who knew they existed. Emma Thornton had never expected to become a single mother living in rural Massachusetts. 5 years earlier, she had been an up-and-coming conservator at the Boston Museum of American History, specializing in Revolutionary-era documents and artifacts. Her husband, David, had taught early American history at a prestigious university, and together they had built a life immersed in the nation's past while raising their children in a cozy Cambridge apartment. When David was diagnosed with aggressive lymphoma, their carefully constructed world began to unravel. He fought bravely for 18 months, but medical bills mounted despite insurance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After his death, Emma found herself emotionally devastated and financially compromised, with two young children looking to her for stability. "You always land on your feet, Em," her sister Catherine had told her. "It's your superpower." Emma had tried to live up to that faith, throwing herself into her museum work while juggling single parenthood. Abigail, now 12, had inherited her father's analytical mind and passion for history. 9-year-old Noah was more reserved, still processing the loss of his father through quiet observation and occasional nightmares. For 3 years, they had maintained a precarious balance. Emma excelled at her conservation work, earning recognition for her restoration of a previously damaged letter from John Adams to his wife Abigail. Her specialty, detecting forgeries and authenticating controversial historical documents, had made her particularly valuable to the museum. Then came the budget cuts. The museum's main benefactor had redirected funding, forcing administration to eliminate several specialist positions. Emma's role was among them, despite her reputation. "Your work is exceptional," the director had told her while delivering the news, "but we're shifting focus to digital initiatives and interactive exhibitions. Traditional conservation is, well, it's not where our funding is directed anymore." The severance package had been modest, barely covering 3 months of Cambridge rent. As Emma's savings dwindled, the reality of Boston's housing market became increasingly oppressive. A conservator's salary had been adequate when combined with David's income, but on her own, maintaining their life in the city seemed impossible, especially with childcare costs. "What about moving somewhere less expensive?" Catherine had suggested during one of their weekly phone calls. "You could take a smaller museum position in a different city." Emma had begun applying for positions across the country, but the specialized nature of her expertise meant opportunities were few and competition fierce. Most openings attracted hundreds of qualified applicants, many willing to relocate immediately. The breaking point came when Abigail's teacher expressed concern about the girl's withdrawal from school activities and friends. "She's under tremendous stress," the teacher had explained. "Children are remarkably perceptive about financial insecurity." That night, unable to sleep, Emma had expanded her property search beyond city apartments to include rural options within commuting distance of smaller museums. The listing for the Westfield farmhouse had appeared almost as an afterthought, a foreclosure auction in a town she'd never visited, 3 hours from Boston. 5 acres, pre-Civil War farmhouse, significant restoration needed. Minimum bid, $150,000, the listing had stated simply. The photographs showed a neglected but structurally sound 2-story farmhouse with a detached barn, surrounded by overgrown fields and bordered by woodland. Emma's first thought had been practical. The price was within reach if she liquidated her retirement fund. Her second thought was more emotional. Perhaps a project, a physical manifestation of rebuilding, was exactly what her family needed. The auction was scheduled for the following week. Emma had arranged a day off work to drive out and inspect the property before deciding whether to bid. She had expected to find structural damage that would make the project impractical, an easy reason to dismiss the impulsive idea. Instead, she found unexpected possibility. The house's bones were solid, hand-hewn beams, fieldstone foundation, plaster walls crumbling in places but repairable. The roof needed replacement, the plumbing was questionable, and the electrical system dangerously outdated. But beneath the decay was craftsmanship that resonated with her conservator's appreciation for historical integrity. "Mom, there's a creek behind the property," Noah had called out, momentarily animated as he explored the overgrown backyard. Abigail had discovered a gnarled apple orchard, trees unpruned for decades but still bearing fruit. Emma had walked through each room, mentally cataloguing repairs and calculating costs. The kitchen needed complete modernization. Bathrooms would have to be gutted, windows required reglazing or replacement, but the wide plank floors could be saved, the ornate woodwork restored, the 9/9 windows repaired rather than replaced. "Are we really going to live here?" Abigail had asked, her voice uncharacteristically hopeful. "We're considering it," Emma had answered cautiously. "It needs a tremendous amount of work." "We could do it together," Abigail had said. "Like one of those renovation shows, but for real." The auction itself had been sparsely attended. A bank representative, 2 property developers, and Emma. The developers had seemed interested primarily in the land value, discussing potential subdivisions while waiting for proceedings to begin. When bidding started at $150,000, Emma had raised her hand with surprising confidence. Going once, going twice, sold to the woman in the blue jacket for $187,000, the auctioneer had announced after a brief bidding war with one of the developers. Just like that, Emma Thornton had become the owner of the Westfield farmhouse. With the remains of her savings and retirement funds, she had exactly enough for the purchase price and approximately $45,000 for renovations, far less than the project truly required, but enough to make the house livable while she continued improvements over time. The decision had meant leaving her apartment, withdrawing the children from their Boston schools, and moving to a town where they knew no one. It had meant trading, security for uncertainty, comfort for challenge. But as Emma had packed their belongings and said goodbye to their Cambridge life, she'd felt the first stirrings of genuine hope since David's death. The farmhouse represented possibility, a chance to rebuild not just walls and floors, but their family's foundation. Emma had no construction experience beyond basic home maintenance, but she had research skills and determination. She'd spent evenings studying renovation techniques, watching tutorials, and planning each stage of the restoration. Now, 4 months into their new life, with the children enrolled in local schools and the kitchen and 2 bedrooms made habitable, Emma faced an unexpected threat. The journals, hidden beneath the floorboards, might explain why her simple renovation had suddenly attracted federal attention, and why someone powerful enough to send a government representative might want to control the property she'd poured her family's future into. The rural auction had been scheduled for a rainy Tuesday morning in early April, held in the community room of the Millfield County Courthouse. Emma had arrived 30 minutes early, clipboard in hand, containing her carefully researched notes about the Westfield property and the maximum bid she could afford without completely depleting her financial reserves. The property had been listed, among 12 others, mostly foreclosed modern homes and a few commercial lots. The Westfield farmhouse stood out as the only historical property, described in the auction materials as Lot 7, Historic Farmhouse, circa 1830-1850, with 5.3 acres, significant restoration required, minimum bid $150,000, sold as is, no warranty, expressed or implied. Emma had positioned herself near the back of the room, wanting to observe the other bidders before revealing her interest. The auction room was sparsely populated. Economic downturns had made rural property less desirable, and most young families preferred modern homes with minimal maintenance requirements. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit had arrived just before the proceedings began, accompanied by a younger assistant carrying architectural drawings. Emma overheard snippets of their conversation about development potential and heritage tourism concepts. Her heart sank at the realization that a professional developer might be interested in the same property. The first 6 lots sold quickly, mostly to bank representatives and a few local residents. When the auctioneer announced Lot 7, Emma straightened in her seat, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. We'll start the bidding at $150,000 for this historic property, the auctioneer announced. A unique opportunity to own a piece of local history. Do I have $150,000? Emma raised her paddle tentatively. I have $150,000 from paddle number 23. Do I have $155,000? The man in the expensive suit nodded almost imperceptibly. I have $155,000 from paddle number 17. Do I have $160,000? Emma raised her paddle again, heart pounding. Her absolute maximum was $195,000, every cent she could gather by liquidating her retirement accounts and using the remains of David's life insurance. Beyond that, she would be completely without resources. The bidding continued in $5,000 increments, each raise driving a spike of anxiety through Emma's chest. At $180,000, an elderly gentleman who had been silently observing suddenly entered. The bidding, creating a three-way competition. At $185,000, the elderly man shook his head and withdrew. The suited developer smiled confidently at Emma, as if assessing whether she would continue or surrender. Emma raised her paddle for $190,000, her second-to-last possible bid. $195,000, the developer countered immediately, watching her closely. Emma hesitated, paddle half raised. This was her absolute maximum. If she won at this price, she would have almost nothing left for renovations. The practical choice was to withdraw. The developer seemed to sense her hesitation, already turning to his assistant with a victorious smile. $197,000, Emma heard herself say, exceeding her predetermined limit before her rational mind could intervene. The developer's head snapped back toward her, eyes narrowing in assessment. The room fell silent as he consulted briefly with his assistant. Finally, he gave a dismissive wave, going once at $197,000, going twice. Sold to paddle number 23 for $197,000, the auctioneer declared, hammer falling with finality. Emma's momentary triumph was immediately tempered by panic. She had just committed to spending $2,000 more than she possessed. As she approached the processing table to complete paperwork, her mind raced through options. A personal loan, credit card advances, selling her grandmother's silver service. Congratulations, the clerk said, sliding forms across the table. You'll need to provide a 10% deposit today, with the balance due within 30 days. Emma nodded, signing where indicated, and providing her cashier's check for the deposit. As she turned to leave, the developer approached. Bold move, he said, extending his hand. Victor Harrington, Meridian Development. That's quite a project you've taken on. Emma shook his hand briefly. Emma Thornton. Yes, it's going to be a significant undertaking. Our firm specializes in historical properties, Harrington continued. We currently have 3 similar restoration projects underway across New England. If you decide the renovation is beyond your capabilities, I'd be happy to discuss purchase options. He handed her a business card. We could offer a very fair price, perhaps even a modest profit on your investment. Emma tucked the card into her pocket. Thank you, but I'm committed to the restoration. It's going to be our home. Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course, though I should mention, these projects typically cost 3 to 4 times the purchase price to complete properly. Historic preservation standards are demanding. After he departed, Emma stood in the courthouse hallway, reality crashing down. She had just committed nearly every cent she possessed to buy a dilapidated farmhouse without adequate funds for renovation, and she had outbid a professional developer who clearly still wanted the property. Over the next 4 weeks, Emma sold her grandmother's silver, borrowed $3,000 from her reluctant sister, and applied for 3 credit cards to gather the remaining funds for closing. The property became hers officially on a bright May morning. the deed transfer completed with signatures and handshakes at the county clerk's office. The clerk, a friendly woman in her 60s, had smiled as she stamped the final documents. "The old Westfield place. My grandfather used to talk about that property, said there were stories about it being something important long ago, though nobody could ever say exactly what." Emma had asked for details, but the clerk shrugged. "Just old-timer tales. Every historic property around here has rumors attached to it. Most aren't true, just stories people like to tell." That afternoon, Emma had driven her children to see their new home, truly theirs now, not just a possibility. The farmhouse had stood silent in the spring sunshine, windows like vacant eyes, weathered clapboards grey with age. To anyone else, it might have appeared forlorn and abandoned, but to Emma it represented possibility, a chance to rebuild their lives from the foundation up. "It looks haunted," Noah had commented, clutching his action figure tightly. "Not haunted," Abigail had corrected. "Just waiting. Houses need people in them, or they get sad." Emma had unlocked the front door, pushing it open on groaning hinges. The musty scent of abandonment greeted them, dust, aged wood, and the faint tang of mildew. Sunlight had streamed through dirty windows, illuminating floating particles in golden beams. "It's going to be beautiful," Emma had said, with more confidence than she felt. "We'll start with the kitchen and 2 bedrooms, make those comfortable first, then tackle the rest room by room." That night, they had camped in the living room, sleeping bags spread on dusty floors, eating pizza illuminated by battery-powered lanterns. Emma had lain awake long after the children fell asleep, listening to the unfamiliar creaks and settling sounds of their new home, wondering if she had made the biggest mistake of her life or its most courageous decision. The opportunity had chosen her as much as she had chosen it. Now, 4 months later, with Richard Blackwood's official notice threatening everything she'd worked for, Emma understood that the Westfield farmhouse had always been more than just an affordable home. It had been waiting for someone who would discover its secrets. Millfield County had once been known as the breadbasket of western Massachusetts, its rolling farmland producing abundant wheat, corn, and apples since colonial times. The county seat, Millfield proper, had grown from a modest settlement into a picturesque New England town with a distinctive white-steepled church dominating the town square and federal-style buildings lining the main street. Unlike many rural communities that had succumbed to economic hardship, Millfield had maintained a delicate balance, preserving its historical character while adapting to changing times. The community college on the edge of town provided stable employment, and a small but persistent tourist trade sustained the downtown shops and restaurants. Locals claimed that George Washington had once passed through during the Revolutionary War, though no historical marker commemorated this supposed visit. The Westfield property sat 3 miles outside town limits, along rural Route 27, a winding road that connected Millfield to the smaller village of Cooperstown, 10 miles north. The farmhouse stood set back from the road, partially obscured by mature maple trees. A stone wall, sagging in places but largely intact, marked the property, boundaries along the roadside. For much of the 19th century, the Westfield farm had been known for its apple orchards and dairy production. County records showed continuous ownership by the Westfield family until 1892, when financial hardship during an economic depression forced its sale to the Johnston family. The Johnstons had maintained the property as a working farm until the 1970s, when changing agricultural economics made small-scale farming increasingly difficult. The last owner, Harold Johnston, had lived alone in the farmhouse until his death in 2007, after which his nephew in California inherited the property but never occupied it. Property taxes went unpaid for years, finally forcing the county to seize the land for auction. Local historical records made little mention of the Westfield farmhouse beyond agricultural census data and property transfers. It was considered historically significant only in the general sense that applied to any structure predating the Civil War, rather than for any specific events or connections. This ordinary historical record made Emma's discovery all the more extraordinary. The journal she had found beneath the floorboards told a different story, one absent from official narratives and local knowledge. On her second morning after finding the hidden documents, Emma sat at her makeshift desk in the farmhouse kitchen, carefully examining each page using techniques from her museum conservation training. The journal's leather binding showed characteristic wear patterns consistent with early 19th century manufacturing. The paper contained linen fibers and showed the distinctive chain lines of handmade paper from the period. The ink had the expected iron gall composition, fading to brown rather than black as it aged. Most compelling was the handwriting itself, the distinctive penmanship of a well-educated person from the federal period, with characteristic flourishes and consistent letter forms throughout. Emma had spent years studying documents from this era. Her professional assessment was that these papers were genuine. The journal belonged to Eleanor Westfield, wife of Samuel Westfield, who had purchased the property in 1779, immediately following the Revolutionary War. Eleanor's entries spanned from 1781 to 1787, a critically important period between the end of the Revolutionary War and the Constitutional Convention. The content was extraordinary. Eleanor documented a series of meetings held at the farmhouse between 1782 and 1785. Gatherings of men whose names appeared in history books discussing governance principles that would later shape the Constitution. These weren't the famous, documented conventions, but rather smaller private gatherings where ideas were tested and refined away from public scrutiny. April 15, 1783, one entry read, Mr. J and Mr. A arrived separately to avoid drawing attention. The discussion quickly turned contentious regarding the balance between central authority and state sovereignty. Mr. A advocates stronger federal powers, while Mr. J insists upon preserving state autonomy. Samuel suggests a system of shared powers, with explicit limitations, which seemed to moderate the disagreement. The implications were profound. Historians had long debated how certain constitutional principles had evolved, particularly federalism and separation of powers. These journals suggested that key concepts had been developed and refined through private discussions in rural Massachusetts, years before the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. If authentic, the documents would significantly revise understanding of constitutional history. They would also transform the overlooked Westfield farmhouse from an ordinary historical structure into a nationally significant site, a previously unknown cradle of American constitutional thinking. Emma understood why such a discovery might attract powerful interests. Historical tourism generated billions in revenue annually. Major historical sites received federal funding, preservation grants, and institutional support. Corporations sponsored exhibits and educational programs at such locations, gaining valuable public relations benefits. Beyond economic considerations lay academic prestige. Universities, historical societies, and museums competed fiercely for association with significant historical discoveries. Careers were built on such findings. The researcher who authenticated and published analysis of these journals would gain substantial professional recognition. As a trained conservator, Emma knew the proper protocols for handling such a discovery. Significant historical documents should be reported to state historical authorities, professionally preserved and made available to qualified researchers under controlled conditions. The site itself would warrant archaeological assessment and professional historical documentation. Yet Richard Blackwood's approach had been suspicious, not the transparent process of legitimate historical assessment, but rather a heavy-handed attempt to halt her renovation and potentially threaten her ownership. His connection to Meridian development suggested commercial interests rather than historical preservation might be driving the sudden attention to her property. The timing was equally troubling. Emma had owned the farmhouse for 4 months, conducting visible renovations without any official interest. Only after removing the floorboards in the north room had Blackwood appeared with his cease and desist order. The conclusion seemed inescapable. Someone knew about the documents before she discovered them. Someone had been monitoring the property, waiting for the hidden cash to be found. Emma spent hours researching Meridian development, discovering a pattern that heightened her concerns. The company specialized in acquiring historically significant properties, developing them into luxury historical experiences, exclusive hotels, private museums, and high-end event venues that allowed wealthy clients to connect with history through carefully curated experiences. Victor Harrington, the developer she had outbid at auction, was Meridian's CEO. His company had recently completed a controversial project converting a civil rights landmark into a boutique hotel in Alabama, and was currently developing several Revolutionary-era properties in Virginia and Massachusetts. A pattern emerged in these acquisitions: initial interest from federal historical agencies, followed by declarations of development restrictions that forced owners to sell at reduced prices, and finally, Meridian's acquisition and commercial development. In each case, the historical narrative became secondary to the luxury experience being sold. Emma considered her options as rain tapped against the kitchen windows. She could report her discovery through official channels, risking loss of control over both the documents and potentially her property. She could conceal the discovery, violating professional ethics and historical preservation laws. Or she could find another path, one that protected both the historical significance and her family's new home. Whatever she decided, Emma needed allies, people with expertise and resources beyond her own. Her thoughts turned to Dr. James Mitchell, her former academic advisor and a respected authority on early American documents. If anyone could authenticate these journals and navigate the complex intersection of historical significance and property rights, it would be him. With renewed determination, Emma carefully photographed several pages of the journal, then returned the documents to their metal box. She would hide them elsewhere until she could determine a safer course of action. The official order prohibited renovation work, but it couldn't stop her from protecting a historical treasure that might rewrite America's constitutional origins and might save her family's new beginning. 3 days after hiding the journal and letters, Emma established a temporary conservation workspace in the farmhouse's dining room. Using supplies ordered online, archival gloves, acid-free folders, a digital microscope that connected to her laptop, and specialized lighting, she created a makeshift lab that resembled her former museum workspace in miniature. The children had been sworn to secrecy, a responsibility 12-year-old Abigail embraced with solemn dedication, and Noah accepted with wide-eyed excitement at being included in the secret mission. "Remember," Emma instructed them during breakfast, "if anyone asks what Mom is doing in the dining room, what do you say?" "You're organizing old renovation plans," Abigail recited dutifully, "and documenting stuff for the government people," Noah added around a mouthful of cereal. Emma nodded. "Perfect. And who can go into the dining room?" "Nobody except us," the children answered in unison. With the children off to school, Emma retrieved the metal box from its new hiding place, inside a hollow section of wall behind a loose baseboard in her bedroom. At her improvised workstation, she carefully extracted each document, creating a preliminary inventory and condition assessment. The collection contained 19 distinct items. Eleanor Westfield's journal, spanning 1781 or 1787, 12 letters addressed to Samuel Westfield from various correspondents, including several bearing signatures that appeared to match known founding fathers. 3 hand-drawn maps showing the property and surrounding areas with curious notations. A small ledger recording visitors and dates, and 2 pamphlets containing early drafts of political essays that would later appear in broader circulation. Emma photographed each item comprehensively, creating high-resolution digital copies before returning the originals to archival folders. She then began transcribing Eleanor's journal, starting with entries that mentioned specific visitors and discussions. The journal described the farmhouse functioning as what Eleanor called a neutral ground, a location chosen specifically because it was neither an established political center nor associated with any particular faction. Its rural setting provided both privacy and a symbolic remove from existing power structures, allowing for more creative political thinking. June 8, 1783, read one entry. Samuel has redesigned the north room specifically for these gatherings. The unusual acoustics prevent voices from carrying, and the hidden access through the root cellar provides a means for visitors to arrive unobserved. Mr. M expressed particular appreciation for these arrangements, as his participation would be gravely misunderstood if known publicly. Emma paused at this entry, considering its implications. The north room would be the very space where she had discovered the documents, apparently designed specifically for secret meetings, and the reference to a hidden access suggested there might be additional concealed features yet to be discovered. By mid-afternoon, Emma had compiled enough transcribed material to justify reaching out to Dr. Mitchell. She composed a carefully worded email, deliberately vague about the full scope of her discovery, while providing enough detail to pique his professional interest. During renovation of a pre-Civil War farmhouse in western Massachusetts, she wrote, I've encountered documents that may relate to previously undocumented meetings of political significance during the 1780s. Given your expertise in this period, I would greatly value your assessment. The materials appear authentic based on my preliminary conservation analysis, but I'm proceeding with appropriate caution. She attached 3 carefully selected photographs, showing the journal's binding, a page featuring Eleanor's handwriting, and the signature from one letter, without including any content that would reveal the document's full historical significance. After sending the email, Emma spent an hour researching Richard Blackwood. His credentials proved difficult to verify. While he presented himself as representing a federal historical agency, she could find no record of his employment with the National Park Service, the National Register of Historic Places, or any other government historical organization. His consulting firm, Bedford Historical Assessments, had been incorporated just 14 months earlier, with Meridian Development listed among its first clients. The connection to Victor Harrington and Meridian was troubling, suggesting Blackwood's official intervention might be commercially motivated rather than driven by legitimate historical preservation concerns. Emma's phone rang just as she was closing her laptop. The caller ID showed Millfield Elementary School. Ms. Thornton, this is Principal Winters. There's been an incident involving Noah. He's not hurt, but I need you to come to the school right away. 20 minutes later, Emma sat in the principal's office beside a tearful Noah. He got into an altercation with another student, Principal Winters explained. When the teacher separated them, Noah said some concerning things. What things? Emma asked, heart sinking. The principal glanced at Noah, then back to Emma. He told the other child that his house has secret passages where the men who made America used to hide, and that government people want to steal it. When his teacher questioned him, he became quite upset and said he wasn't supposed to talk about the secret mission. Emma closed her eyes briefly. Noah has an active imagination. We've been watching historical documentaries recently. Principal Winter's expression remained skeptical. Ms. Thornton, is everything all right at home? Major transitions like your move can be stressful for children, sometimes leading to concerning behaviors. Everything's fine, Emma assured her, forcing a smile. I'll have a talk with Noah about separating historical documentaries from reality. As they walked to the car, Emma realized she had underestimated the burden that secrecy placed on a 9-year-old. She also realized that time might be running out faster than she'd anticipated. Emma's email to Dr. Mitchell received a response faster than she anticipated. By evening, her phone displayed his name on an incoming call. "Emma, it's been too long," his familiar voice greeted her. "Your email caught my attention immediately. These documents, are you certain about the dating?" "As certain as I can be. Without lab analysis," Emma replied, stepping onto the porch to speak privately while the children ate dinner. "The paper, binding, ink composition, everything aligns with period-appropriate materials. And you found these during renovation? At your current residence?" "Yes, beneath floorboards in one of the rooms." A pause followed. "Emma, I don't want to alarm you, but if these are what they appear to be, authentic 1780s documents containing politically sensitive content, you need to be extremely careful about how you proceed." "I'm already facing interference," Emma admitted. "Someone claiming to represent a federal historical agency served me with papers halting my renovation. But his credentials don't check out, and he's connected to a development company that tried to buy this property at auction." Mitchell's tone changed, concern deepening. "This is troubling. Historical documents of this period have become increasingly valuable, both academically and commercially. The market for Revolutionary-era manuscripts has exploded in recent years, with single letters from prominent figures fetching hundreds of thousands at auction." "I'm not interested in selling them," Emma clarified. "That may not matter to others who are," Mitchell warned. "Where are the documents now?" "Secure. I've created digital copies as insurance." "Good. I'd like to examine them, but meeting at your property might draw unwanted attention. Can you come to Boston this weekend? Bring the digital copies, not the originals." Emma agreed, then explained she needed to update her children's father about their situation. The lie felt necessary. She couldn't discuss the actual reason for a Boston trip over an unsecured phone line. After ending the call, Emma returned inside to find Abigail had already cleared the dinner dishes and was helping Noah with homework. The responsibility her daughter had assumed since David's death sometimes broke Emma's heart. 12 was too young to become a second parent. "Everything okay, Mom?" Abigail asked, intuitive as always. "Yes, just work details. We're going to Boston this weekend to visit the museum." Abigail's eyes widened slightly, their shared signal that she understood this wasn't the real plan, but would play along. Noah remained focused on his math worksheet, apparently having learned his lesson about discussing family secrets. The following morning, Emma drove the children to school, then returned home to continue documenting the historical materials. As she turned into her driveway, she noticed an unfamiliar vehicle parked along the road near her property, a black SUV with tinted windows and government plates. Her heart raced as she pulled alongside her house rather than into the open barn she'd been using as a garage. Through her rearview mirror, she watched the SUV remain stationary, its occupants invisible behind darkened glass. Inside, Emma moved quickly to the dining room, gathering her conservation supplies and returning them to their storage containers. She had just finished when a firm knock sounded at the front door. Through the peephole, she saw Richard Blackwood standing on her porch, accompanied by a younger man in a dark suit whose posture suggested law enforcement training. "Miss Thornton," Blackwood called through the door, "we need to discuss your continued renovation activities in violation of the preservation order." Emma opened the door, but remained in the doorway, blocking entry. "I haven't done any renovation work since receiving your notice, Mr. Blackwood. We've received reports of activity inconsistent with a work stoppage," Blackwood replied smoothly. "This is Agent Carter with the Department of Interior. We're authorized to inspect the property to ensure compliance." Emma studied the younger man's identification badge carefully, noting it appeared genuine. "Do you have a warrant for this inspection, Agent?" Carter stepped forward. "Ms. Thornton, federal historical preservation statutes give us authority to inspect properties under assessment without additional warrants. Your cooperation would be appreciated." Emma knew enough about preservation law to recognize the half-truth. Federal agencies had inspection rights for properties already designated as historically significant, but not for private residences merely under consideration. "I'll need to see the specific authorization," she said firmly, "and I'll need to contact my attorney before allowing any inspection." Blackwood's professional demeanor slipped slightly. "Ms. Thornton, obstruction could result in significant penalties. We're not just concerned about unauthorized renovations, but about potential removal of historically significant artifacts from the property." The specific mention of artifacts confirmed Emma's suspicions. They knew about the documents, or at least suspected their existence. Someone had been monitoring the property before she made her discovery. "My attorney will contact your office this afternoon to arrange a properly authorized inspection," Emma insisted, her museum work having taught her the importance of proper protocols when dealing with authorities. "We can return with a formal warrant," Agent Carter warned. "You're welcome to do so," Emma replied, maintaining her composure despite her pounding heart. "Until then, I'll be documenting the current condition of my property to ensure any inspection doesn't result in damage to the historical elements I've been carefully preserving." After a tense moment, Blackwood nodded to Carter, and the two men retreated to their vehicle. Emma closed the door, then leaned against it, breathing deeply to calm herself. Through the side window, she watched the SUV remain parked for nearly 10 minutes before finally pulling away. The confrontation had confirmed her fears. She wasn't dealing with routine historical preservation bureaucracy, but rather a targeted effort to access her property and, most likely, the documents she'd discovered. The involvement of someone presenting as a federal agent elevated the situation from concerning to potentially dangerous. Emma needed to accelerate her plans. The weekend meeting with Dr. Mitchell was still 3 days away. 3 days during which Blackwood and his associates might return with actual legal authority to search her property. She needed to move the documents to a secure location immediately, but the SUV's presence suggested they might be monitoring her movements. Any obvious attempt to remove items from the house could trigger intervention. As Emma considered her options, her phone chimed with an incoming text from an unfamiliar number. "Be careful who you trust. Not all with credentials are who they claim. The farmhouse has more secrets than you've found. A friend." The anonymous text message left Emma deeply unsettled. Someone knew about her discovery, was aware of her confrontation with Blackwood and Carter, and apparently had access to her personal phone number. The warning about credentials suggested her suspicions about the supposed federal agent were justified, but the mention of more secrets raised new questions about what else the farmhouse might contain. After checking that the mysterious SUV hadn't returned, Emma retrieved Eleanor Westfield's journal and reread entries mentioning the hidden access through the root cellar. The farmhouse didn't have a traditional root cellar, at least not one accessible through any obvious entrance. During her initial renovation assessment, Emma had noted a peculiar gap in the foundation layout, suggesting a space that should exist but had no apparent entry point. "Abigail and Noah will be home in 3 hours," Emma murmured to herself. "That's all the time I have." Grabbing a flashlight and her phone, Emma descended to the basement, a stone-walled space with a dirt floor that she'd only cursorily examined during initial renovations. The foundation consisted of stacked fieldstone typical of early American construction, creating walls nearly 2 feet thick. Along the north wall, she noticed something she'd previously overlooked, slight variations in the mortar color in a roughly door-shaped pattern. Eleanor's journal had mentioned the north room specifically designed for meetings, with its hidden access through the root cellar. The secret documents had been found beneath the floor of that same north room, directly above where Emma now stood examining the wall. Pressing against different stones yielded nothing until her hand found a particular, rounded stone that shifted slightly under pressure. Heart racing, Emma pushed harder then sideways. With a grinding sound, a section of the wall pivoted inward, revealing a narrow passage beyond. "My God," Emma whispered, shining her flashlight into the opening. A crude tunnel extended about 15 feet before opening into a small chamber. Emma hesitated only briefly before ducking through the opening, careful to note how the hidden door operated from the inside. The chamber beyond was approximately 12 feet square, its walls lined with the same fieldstone as the foundation, but more carefully finished. Unlike the damp basement, this space felt surprisingly dry. Archaeological instincts kicking in, Emma methodically examined the room, documenting everything with her phone's camera. Built-in shelving lined one wall, now empty but evidently designed to hold documents and books. A narrow table stood against another wall, its surface bare except for decades of dust. Most intriguing was a crude ladder leading to a wooden hatch in the ceiling, presumably providing the hidden access to the north room that Eleanor had described in her journal. A secret meeting room, Emma realized, connected to a hidden passage. The implications were significant. Eleanor's journal had described meetings of founding fathers at the farmhouse, but hadn't specified they occurred in a concealed underground chamber. This wasn't merely a convenient meeting location, it was a deliberately hidden space designed for clandestine gatherings. As Emma carefully examined the room, her flashlight beam caught something metallic in a gap between stones near the floor. Using her pocket knife, she gently pried out a small object, a brass button bearing an unfamiliar insignia, tarnished with age, but clearly very old. Continuing her systematic examination, Emma noticed something unusual about the flagstone floor. Unlike the dirt floor in the main basement, this chamber had been formally finished with flat stones. One stone near the corner appeared slightly different from the others, lighter in color and with cleaner edges around its perimeter. Kneeling beside it, Emma found she could lift the stone, revealing another hidden compartment beneath. Inside lay a leather satchel, its surface cracked with age, but still intact. With trembling fingers, Emma lifted it from its hiding place, setting it gently on the table. The satchel's ancient leather ties crumbled as she carefully opened it. Inside was another journal, significantly older than Eleanor's, its pages yellow and brittle. Opening to the first page with extreme care, Emma found a name written in faded ink. Journal of Samuel Westfield, 1774-1789. Below this simple title was an additional line that caused Emma's breath to catch. Record of the secret. Committee of Correspondence. Emma knew immediately the historical significance of this discovery. The Committee of Correspondence had been a shadow network established before the Revolution to coordinate colonial resistance against British rule. Historical records documented its official activities, but rumors had persisted for centuries about a smaller, more secretive faction that continued operating after independence to shape the new nation's governance. Historians had debated the existence of this secret committee for generations, but had never found conclusive evidence. If authentic, Samuel Westfield's journal would confirm its existence and document its activities during the critical period between winning independence and establishing constitutional government. The journal contained not only Samuel's observations, but also carefully preserved minutes of meetings, lists of attendees, identified only by initials, and summaries of debates on governance principles. Most significantly, it included coded references to a secure repository of sensitive documents maintained at the property, strongly suggesting that additional materials might remain hidden somewhere on the grounds. Emma carefully photographed several pages before returning the journal to its satchel. This second discovery elevated the historical significance of the farmhouse beyond even her initial assessment. The property hadn't merely hosted occasional meetings of founding fathers, it had apparently served as a secret operations center for a shadow group guiding the new nation's development. As she carefully replaced the flagstone and prepared to exit the hidden chamber, Emma realized the anonymous text message had been accurate. The farmhouse did indeed contain more secrets than she'd initially found, secrets that would make it even more valuable to those who sought to control it. Checking the time, Emma hurried back through the passage, carefully closing the hidden entrance behind her. She had less than an hour before the children returned from school, and critical decisions to make about how to proceed with knowledge that could rewrite American history and might determine whether her family could keep their new home. Saturday morning arrived grey and drizzly, perfect weather for a family excursion that wouldn't attract attention. Emma had spent 2 anxious days following her discovery of the hidden chamber, watching for surveillance while continuing to document the historical materials. The black SUV had reappeared briefly on Thursday afternoon, but departed after an hour. "Remember," Emma instructed as they loaded into her car, "today we're visiting the museum where I used to work. That's our story, if anyone asks." "Operation History Rescue," Noah whispered dramatically from the back seat, having embraced their secrecy as an exciting adventure rather than a concerning situation. Abigail nodded seriously, understanding the stakes more clearly than her brother. "I packed snacks and games for the drive, and I brought my history report research as cover." Emma smiled gratefully at her daughter's thoughtfulness. "Perfect. Let's go." The drive to Boston took nearly 3 hours, during which Emma frequently checked her rearview mirror for any vehicles that might be following them. By mid-morning, they arrived at their actual destination, not the museum, but a coffee shop near Harvard, where Dr. Mitchell had arranged to meet them. James Mitchell was waiting at a corner table, his tall frame and silver hair exactly as Emma remembered from her graduate studies. Now in his mid-60s, Mitchell remained one of the most respected authorities on early American documents, having authenticated several significant historical finds throughout his career. "There's my favorite conservator," he greeted Emma warmly, then smiled at the children. "And these must be Abigail and Noah. I've heard wonderful things about you both." After settling the children with hot chocolates and pastries, Emma placed her laptop on the table, angling it away from other patrons. "I've brought the digital copies," she said quietly. "The originals remain secure." For the next hour, Mitchell methodically examined the photographs Emma had taken, occasionally asking technical questions about paper texture, binding techniques, and ink characteristics. His expression grew increasingly focused as he reviewed. Eleanor's journal entries, the correspondence, and finally, the images of Samuel Westfield's hidden journal. "This is extraordinary," he finally said, removing his reading glasses. "Based on what I can assess from these images, these appear to be authentic period documents. The handwriting is consistent with other verified manuscripts from these individuals. The content," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "if verified, would significantly alter our understanding of how the Constitution evolved." "So they're genuine?" Emma pressed. "I believe so, though I'd need to examine the originals for absolute confirmation. The Samuel Westfield Journal is particularly significant. The secret committee of correspondence has been historical speculation for centuries. This would be the first documented evidence of its continued operation after independence." While the children explored a nearby bookstore under Abigail's watchful supervision, Mitchell explained the broader implications. "You've essentially discovered a shadow constitutional convention, informal meetings where core principles were debated and refined before the official proceedings in Philadelphia. This challenges the standard narrative about how our governance framework developed, which makes the farmhouse a historically significant location," Emma concluded. "Nationally significant," Mitchell corrected. "Equivalent to Independence Hall or Montpelier, this site hosted meetings that shaped our constitutional framework, conducted in secret to allow for more honest debate without political posturing." Mitchell's validation confirmed the historical importance of her discovery, but raised new concerns about protecting both the documents and her property rights. "Someone already knows about this," Emma explained, describing Blackwood's intervention and the text message warning. "They're moving aggressively to gain control of the property." Mitchell nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, that aligns with troubling patterns I've observed recently. Historical sites of national significance have become targets for private interests, masquerading as preservation efforts. The documents you found would be worth millions on the private market, and the property itself, once authenticated as a constitutional landmark, would be invaluable for certain types of commercial development. What should I do? If I report the discovery through official channels, could I lose control of the property?" "That's a legitimate concern," Mitchell admitted. "Federal designation as a national historic landmark provides certain protections, but can also impose significant restrictions on property use. In extreme cases, the government can exercise eminent domain for sites of extraordinary national significance." Emma's heart sank. "So either private developers or the federal government could essentially force me out?" "Potentially, though there's a third path," Mitchell said, lowering his voice further. "We could build an ironclad authentication and preservation plan before making any official disclosure. Document everything properly, establish clear provenance, and create sufficient public awareness that any attempt to seize control would face significant scrutiny." "How would we do that?" "I have colleagues in various specialties: document authentication, constitutional history, archaeological assessment. We could assemble a small, trusted team to properly document your discovery before approaching official channels." Emma considered this approach. "How quickly could they work? Blackwood is already moving to gain access to the property. Give me 3 days to assemble the team. In the meantime, you should consider temporary relocation of the original documents. Your home may not be secure." "Where would I take them?" Mitchell thought for a moment. "I have a colleague at Williams College with access to a conservation vault. I can arrange secure storage there while we assemble our team." As they finalized plans, Emma's phone chimed with another text from the anonymous number. "Blackwood obtained search warrant. Will execute Monday morning. Move quickly. A friend." Mitchell read the message over her shoulder, his expression grave. You have less time than we thought. Whatever you're going to do with those documents, it needs to happen today. Emma nodded, her mind racing. I need to get the children home and secure the materials before tomorrow. Can your Williams College contact meet tonight? I'll make it happen, Mitchell promised. And Emma, be extremely careful. These documents aren't just historically valuable, they challenge powerful narratives about our nation's founding. That makes them politically significant even centuries later. As Emma gathered the children to leave, the weight of responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. She had become the unexpected guardian of historical materials that could transform understanding of American constitutional origins, and that responsibility now placed her family directly in the path of powerful interests determined to control that narrative. Sunday afternoon found Emma alone in the farmhouse, having sent the children to stay with her sister in Connecticut. The journals and letters were safely delivered to Dr. Mitchell's colleague at Williams College, secured in a climate-controlled vault normally reserved for the institution's rarest manuscripts. The anonymous text had bought her crucial time, but Emma knew Blackwood would return with legal authority to search her property. She had spent the morning systematically photographing every room to document their condition before the impending invasion. At 3:17 p.m., headlights appeared on the rural road approaching her property. Emma watched from an upstairs window as 3 vehicles turned into her driveway. The now familiar black SUV, a Meridian Development Company car, and a local sheriff's cruiser. "Let the games begin," Emma murmured, descending to meet her unwelcome visitors. Richard Blackwood led the group onto her porch, accompanied by Victor Harrington from Meridian, a uniformed sheriff's deputy, and 2 men carrying equipment cases that suggested scanning technology. "Miss Thornton," Blackwood began formally as Emma opened the door. "We have a federal warrant to search these premises for historically significant artifacts and to conduct a structural assessment of features with potential national historical importance." Emma accepted the document, reviewing it carefully. "This warrant specifies non-destructive examination only," she noted. "I'll be photographing your entire search to ensure compliance." Harrington stepped forward, his corporate confidence unwavering. "Ms. Thornton, I understand this feels invasive, but I assure you, Meridian Development has only the best interests of historical preservation in mind. Our specialists are highly trained. How fortunate that a private development company has such concern for historical accuracy," Emma replied coolly. "Please note that while this warrant grants you search authority, it doesn't permit removal of any items without specific judicial approval." The search team moved methodically through the house, scanning walls with ground-penetrating radar and inspecting the original structural elements with particular attention. Emma followed closely, documenting their activities while revealing nothing about her discoveries. When they reached the basement, Emma observed their movements carefully. The experts spent considerable time examining the north wall where the hidden entrance was located, running their hands over the stonework but failing to locate the precise mechanism that activated the pivoting door. "This foundation shows anomalies, consistent with a concealed space," one technician reported. "The density readings indicate a void behind this section of wall." Harrington exchanged meaningful glances with Blackwood. "Ms. Thornton, were you aware of any hidden spaces within this structure?" "I'm still learning about the house's unique architectural features," Emma replied carefully. "As you can see, it's a very old building with many original elements intact." After 3 tense hours, the search team departed without discovering either the hidden chamber or any evidence of the documents Emma had removed. Their frustrated expressions suggested they had expected to find something specific. As the vehicles pulled away, Emma received another message from her anonymous ally. "They'll be back with equipment to break through the wall. Committee meeting tomorrow. 3 p.m., Williams College, Sawyer Library, Special Collections. Dr. M will introduce you." Bring all evidence. A friend. Emma stared at her phone, a chill running down her spine. The message contained information only. Someone intimately familiar with her actions and Mitchell's plans could know. The mysterious friend had information from both sides of this conflict. Most unsettling was the reference to a committee meeting, an echo of the secret committee documented in Samuel Westfield's journal. Emma wondered if her discovery had awakened something that had never truly disappeared, but merely remained, hidden for centuries. Monday afternoon, Emma navigated the winding roads toward Williams College, tension knotting her shoulders. The campus appeared ahead, its historic buildings nestled among autumn-touched trees. Following directions to the Sawyer Library, she parked and checked her appearance in the rear-view mirror, professional, composed, betraying none of the anxiety churning inside her. At exactly 3 p.m., Emma entered the Special Collections reading room where Dr. Mitchell waited, accompanied by 4 people seated around a polished table. Their expressions were solemn, evaluating her as she approached. "Emma Thornton," Mitchell began formally, "I'd like to introduce the assessment committee." The introductions proceeded with academic gravity. Dr. Eleanor Winters, constitutional, historian from Columbia University. Dr. Marcus Abernathy, document authentication specialist from the National Archives. Professor Rebecca Chen, expert in early American political thought. And finally, an elderly gentleman introduced simply as Judge Thomas Harrison, historical consultant. Emma noted that no one mentioned any secret committee, despite her anonymous correspondence message. "We've examined the preliminary evidence," Dr. Winters began without preamble. "If authentic, these documents would fundamentally reshape historical understanding of constitutional development. The authentication results are promising," Abernathy added. "Preliminary testing of the digital images suggests period-appropriate materials and techniques." Emma waited for them to continue, but all 4 committee members simply watched her expectantly. The silence stretched uncomfortably before Judge Harrison spoke. "Miss Thornton, do you understand what you've discovered?" "I believe so," Emma replied carefully. "Documents suggesting that founding fathers conducted secret meetings at the Westfield farmhouse to develop constitutional principles before the Philadelphia Convention." "It's considerably more significant than that," Harrison said, his voice carrying unexpected authority. Samuel Westfield's journal documents the existence of a shadow governance structure, an extra-legal committee operating outside constitutional parameters to guide the nation's development during its fragile early siege years. Professor Chen leaned forward. "These documents suggest our understanding of how American governance evolved is incomplete. The formal constitutional structure existed alongside an informal network of influence that shaped policy implementation." "Some would consider this evidence of conspiracy," Dr. Winters noted bluntly. "Others would see pragmatic necessity during a vulnerable period. The interpretation depends on one's political perspective." Suddenly, Emma understood why Meridian Development, and whoever else might be involved, wanted control of these documents so desperately. They weren't merely historically significant, they were politically explosive even centuries later. They challenged foundational national narratives about democratic origins and constitutional development. "This creates a dilemma," Judge Harrison continued. "Public disclosure would inevitably politicize these findings. Various interests would attempt to control the narrative, some by discrediting the documents, others by exploiting them for contemporary political purposes." "What are you suggesting?" Emma asked, a chill settling over her. "We're suggesting," Mitchell interjected carefully, "that immediate full disclosure may not be the most responsible approach." "You want to suppress this historical discovery?" Emma's conservator ethics recoiled at the suggestion. "Not suppress," Dr. Winters clarified. Manage carefully. These documents require proper context and preparation before public release. Before Emma could respond, her phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Opening it, she found photos of her farmhouse, showing Blackwood's team returning with construction equipment, preparing to breach the north basement wall. Simultaneously, a text arrived from her anonymous correspondent. Choose wisely. History watches. Committee awaits your decision. Emma looked up to find all 5 academics watching her intently, their expressions unreadable. What exactly are you asking me to do? She demanded. To consider, Judge Harrison replied, that some secrets endure for reasons more complex than simple concealment. Emma stared at the committee members, their academic composure masking what she now recognized as intense anticipation. The photos on her phone showed equipment being unloaded at her farmhouse, the physical invasion of her own proceeding while this intellectual confrontation unfolded. You haven't assembled to authenticate these documents, Emma realized aloud. You're evaluating me. Judge Harrison's expression shifted subtly. Perceptive. The question isn't whether these materials are authentic. We've confirmed they are. The question is whether you understand their significance and can be trusted with their stewardship. Stewardship? Emma echoed. These documents belong in national archives, accessible to researchers and the public. A commendable but perhaps naive perspective, Professor Chen replied. Historical truth rarely emerges unfiltered into public consciousness. It's interpreted, contextualized, sometimes managed. The implications crystallized for Emma. You're suggesting these documents have been deliberately kept from public knowledge, that this committee has continued in some form since the founding era. No one directly confirmed her assertion, but the absence of denial was answer enough. We face a critical moment, Dr. Winters said. These materials could become political weapons, manipulated to undermine constitutional authority or hijacked to serve partisan agendas. Their release requires extraordinary care, or they could enlighten our understanding of how governance actually functions, Emma countered. People deserve historical truth, however complex. Noble sentiment, Judge Harrison nodded, but consider the practical consequences. Meridian development isn't merely seeking profit. They represent interests who would control these narratives. For specific purposes, Emma glanced again at her phone, watching strangers prepare to violate her home, to break through walls hiding secrets kept for centuries. The weight of history pressed against her professional ethics, her personal interests, her responsibility to historical truth. What do you propose? She finally asked. Mitchell leaned forward. A carefully managed authentication and release process. The documents would be preserved properly, studied thoroughly, and released with appropriate context. Your property would receive National Historic Landmark designation with you as resident curator, ensuring both preservation and your family's security. And the committee, Emma pressed, would continue its historical role, Harrison replied carefully, protecting certain knowledge until appropriate moments for its revelation. Not censorship, Miss Thornton, curation across generations. Emma considered the impossible choice before her. Complete transparency might serve abstract principles, but could unleash forces beyond her control. The measured approach offered protection for both the documents and her family, though at the cost of participating in managed disclosure she had never believed necessary. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her anonymous correspondent. The north wall is breached. Chamber discovered. Choose now. In that moment, Emma made her decision. I want written guarantees, legal protection for my property rights, my role as curator, and a binding timeline for properly contextualized public release of these materials. The tension in the room visibly eased. Harrison nodded to Mitchell, who produced a document folder from his briefcase. Already prepared, Mitchell said, sliding papers across the table, along with the necessary injunctions to halt Meridian's incursion into your property, effective immediately. Emma reviewed the documents, comprehensive, detailed, and offering everything she had requested. As she signed her name, she realized she wasn't surrendering control of history, but joining its long stewardship. Her phone buzzed one final time. "Welcome to the committee, Miss Thornton." A friend no longer anonymous. She looked up to see Judge Harrison holding his phone, a small smile touching his lips. "Your home is safe now," he said simply, "as are the secrets it was built to protect." 2 years later, Emma stood in the carefully restored north room of the Westfield farmhouse, watching as the final exhibition panels were installed. The room now served as the centerpiece of a small but significant historical museum, the Westfield Constitutional Research Center, dedicated to exploring the informal networks that shaped America's founding governance. Sunlight streamed through restored period windows, illuminating displays that contextualized the documents Emma had discovered. Under the carefully negotiated agreement, Eleanor and Samuel Westfield's journals were now preserved in a state-of-the-art conservation facility on the property, accessible to qualified researchers under protocols that Emma herself had helped design. "Mom, the school buses are arriving!" Abigail called from the porch, now 14 and serving as one of the site's junior docents. Her middle school history project on shadow governance in early America had won national recognition, launching her passion for constitutional history. Through the window, Emma watched as Noah, 11 and growing rapidly, guided visitors toward the welcome center that had been constructed adjacent to the historic structures. Her formerly quiet son had discovered a talent for storytelling, captivating visitors with age-appropriate versions of the farmhouse's significance. The Westfield property had been transformed, but thoughtfully. The hidden chamber was now part of the guided tour, though certain details about the committee's continued existence remained carefully curated. The historical narrative presented to the public was authentic but incomplete, a compromise Emma had initially struggled with, but gradually accepted as responsible stewardship. Dr. Mitchell joined her at the window. "The first official school group," he noted. "How does it feel?" "Surreal," Emma admitted. 2 years ago, I was just trying to create an affordable home for my family. Now we're living in a national historic landmark that you saved from commercial exploitation," Mitchell reminded her. "Meridian's plans would have turned this into an exclusive resort with the historical significance as mere marketing." Emma nodded, watching as Judge Harrison, now revealed as the current chairman of the Modern Committee, greeted distinguished visitors arriving for the center's formal dedication ceremony. Her position as resident curator provided financial security, while allowing her to apply her conservation expertise to materials of extraordinary significance. The phased disclosure plan she had helped develop ensured that historical understanding would evolve thoughtfully rather than explosively. Was it the right choice? She asked quietly, more to herself than Mitchell. History is never about perfect choices, he replied. It's about responsible ones. Some truths need time to be properly understood. As Emma stepped outside to welcome the children filing from yellow school buses, she reflected on how thoroughly her life had transformed. The desperate gamble on an affordable home had led her to become not just a preserver of history, but part of its continuing story, a modern link in a chain of stewardship extending back to the Republic's fragile beginnings. The farmhouse had chosen her as surely as she had chosen it, and together they would continue to reveal America's complexities at a pace the nation could meaningfully absorb. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.